Welcome to another From the Sidelines with our good friend here at Soccer Down here, Jon Akin. Jon, how are you doing?
Doing great, Jason. Thanks for having me this morning.
Yeah, always good to catch up, and it's a match week, the first real match week of your season. You know, it's been a weird preseason. I think not as weird as it was in the spring, obviously, but still kind of navigating everything we're dealing with right now. How do you feel like your squad is prepared for opening weekend?
I think in the Division III world, with a very short preseason, we're looking really good. I think we just had to cancel our opening season game this Wednesday with Tennessee Southern due to the hurricane passing through and their field not being playable, and they don't have turf. So our opening game is now going to be Saturday. And I think the whole week of training should help us get even closer to what we're looking for.
So for people who are interested in coming out this weekend, it's games on Saturday and Sunday. Saturday against Washington and Lee is at Emory, and then Sunday against Emory is at Oglethorpe.
Correct. Yep. Fans are welcome. We're looking forward to having people back on the sidelines. We didn't have that opportunity in the spring, so I think that's going to add a layer of desire and enthusiasm in the players, just seeing people that they love and care about. In general, fans just watching them play, it always jazzes things up.
Yeah, it always adds a little bit of a boost. I mean, we've seen this at all levels right now when fans get back into the stadiums and get back around these games. There is a kind of a jump in intensity a little bit, just a jump in the quality of play. So I'm excited to see it. We'll have streams of both games as well. The match on Saturday will be streamed. You can get to the link from GoPetrels.com, but the match Sunday will be streamed from Oglethorpe. And hopefully we'll have everything ready to roll and have a couple of good games to call. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, no, we're looking forward to having you, as always. Should be interesting.
Yeah, these are two tough opponents to start the season. We've talked a lot about preseason prep and kind of how things have gone, and I know for you, there's always a balancing act between the technical training, the tactical training. We've talked about kind of the balancing of the physical training, and we know where that stands, but how do you go in and balance kind of refining individual skill versus preparing tactics in, at this point in the season when it's still really early?
Yeah, I mean, we can start with a general session, and we always have some sort of technical activity that we kind of brush up on those skills, because our job is to basically collate all the players together, their overall experiences, their overall youth training over years and years and years, and try to get everybody on the same page, which is obviously a challenge. And, very similar to any type of training, we've got to get the habits that are going to set us up to be successful. And sometimes they're introducing habits, and sometimes they're breaking habits for these players. From the technical standpoint, whether it's looking over your shoulder consistently, whether it's receiving, the ball side on, something we've been working about, whether it's, turning and, drawing a player out and playing forward, or, and trying to break players out of, something we see so often is, just pass it backwards, just to keep it and play it safe when, you're not really causing any trouble for the other team. So, keeping the ball is one thing, but not being dangerous and doing, as much damage as you can to the other team that's a different thing. So that's something we focused on this past week, technically, but again, that bleeds into, everything tactically as well.
Yeah, I think there's a little bit of a misnomer out there that players, as they get to the age that you have them in college and players even once they go to the pros, that they kind of are who they are technically. And that can always be refined. There's always things that can be improved upon, or even skill sets that we see players, add to their game as they get older. That's a very important part, I think, of the coaching staff at any level to keep adding new tricks to these guys.
Yeah, and really it's just even making those things better. I mean, I
Yeah.
remember going from a college, a very successful college career to an environment where, 3 or 4 guys that I played with that played in World Cups, when I was at Charleston, and thinking, what I had was good enough. And then you're like, hang on a second, that's not working. How do you improve? And whether it's, your first touch being, half a yard instead of a yard off you, I mean, it makes the difference between keeping possession and doing different things. And certainly these guys coming in at 18 with all different kind of backgrounds and things, they've got to spend, all season, hopefully over their career, continue to develop their craft and develop those skills to be more successful. But they've all got things that they can improve on. And some of them, if not all of them are very position specific, but there's also some generalities that just have to improve. And the only way you can do that is just hammer those things home again and again and again.
I think the other thing you hit on too that's important is, players will have the technical ability to do things, but doing it at the proper pace and doing it quick enough at the next level as they continue to rise is another thing where that repetition in training can help improve the pace of someone's ability.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, basically, there's a psychological analysis, and I can't remember the sports psychologist that did it, but basically, use the example of, high level performance, right?
Mm-hmm.
And they say, you take 100 people and you could, have put a balance beam out there and it's 6 inches off the ground, and 99 out of 100 people could walk 5 yards over a balance beam, and then all of a sudden you move that balance beam up to 2 feet, and then another 20 people drop off, and it's
right.
The same width, it's the same length, but some people can't handle it mentally and focus on it. It's the same skill essentially, mm-hmm. but there's a psychological depth to that. Then you can also add things happen faster, which is difficult. And then you start to get to, a 50-foot level, how many people drop off? And then there's only 2 or 3 or 4 people that could walk on that same balance beam that 100 people could at the 100-foot view. And that's a little bit of a psychological component, but there's also, the technical and skill component of having it, done faster. So it's a great analogy I like to use. And it works both ways, both from a speed factor of going up a level, but also the psychological factor of who can handle it.
Yeah, and that's a perfect way to explain it. And as players kind of have to play faster, but also have to play against better competition, who handles it are the ones who continue on in their careers and continue rising up levels. Now, explain a little bit, because I think this is where a lot of people out there whose kids have played or they've coached a little bit, understand skill building drills and those kinds of things, but then taking the technical work and making it fit into a tactical plan, especially in a game week where you're preparing for 2 games. And you're going to have to rotate guys. You're going to need a lot of players to play in back-to-back days, and they're going to have to all be at as close of a level as you can possibly create between now and then.
Yeah, let's just say start this way. Your best group, if you will, is probably the combination of technique and athleticism that you need to compete. But as they start to fade physically, their technique will go. And so that's when you start to get into a little bit of, the tactical setup of and even the physical setup of putting in fresher players who might not have the best technique, but it's a little bit better than a fatigued kind of starter. That's one way to look at it.
Mm-hmm. So
yeah, and then you can, go ahead.
No, go ahead.
No, and then obviously, if someone's, technique isn't up to par, you might apply them differently, in a different situation later in the game.
That makes sense. And that's where, reading a game and you start to think about lineups, especially I think dealing with the variety of ages that you have some guys who can be impactful for a shorter period of time, especially the younger players as they're adjusting to the level. And as they grow, then they can do it for a longer period of time and sustain it, right?
Yeah, no, exactly. I mean, I think what a lot of times when you make the transition from club soccer or high school soccer to college soccer is, they really struggle with the intensity. What I mean by that is, they're obviously capable because they can compete at that level, and we've recruited them, and they're good players. But the demand of transitioning to defense, it's not okay to make a great 60-yard run and then just kind of walk back and recover, and then you're ready for the next play. It's got to be a dead sprint. You're either putting pressure on the ball or you're joining your line, defense being organized. And that's really where most of them struggle with recognizing that those 3 or 4 seconds when you switch off could be the difference in a 1-0 game that has NCAA implications. So stressing to them how important those key areas are, it's a process.
So then walk me through a little bit when you're creating a session and you've got kind of some of those big picture things in mind about trying to get players ready for the mental pressure, the pace, the intensity, but also creating, your tactical philosophy, the way you want your team to play, while also balancing, as we talked about at the beginning, the technical work that you're always looking to refine. What's a session that you've found over the years that you keep coming back to that kind of combines all of that?
Yeah, it was actually an activity that I saw years ago that the Italian national team does. They basically do some things, and it's funny. Somebody, one of my former assistants, sent me a Facebook, and I'm not really on Facebook personally, but there's some NFL meme or clips of guys doing like walking patterns.
Yeah.
About and I don't know, the coaches jump out there and do it. But anyway, it was funny. He said, now the NFL is blowing up this walking, football thing, but Jon Akin's been doing it for forever at Oglethorpe. So what we do is when I'm trying to paint the tactical picture, we basically walk. We play 11v11 laterally across the field, and a full opponents, and they can do whatever they want to do, take 2 touches, 3 touches, 1 touch, but they have to walk. And the thought process is, these are the general pictures. You're going to see it in slow motion, and you're going to grasp what we're looking for, and I'll stop and make coaching points. And then I also say, guys, if you can't do it while you're walking, how are we going to do it when we're on a dead sprint? So a little bit of tongue in cheek there, but it's also very realistic that you've got to see these images first. And then we're going to, then I release the walking restriction, and then they go top speed, and usually they screw it up. And then we kind of peel back and like, hey, where was the better soccer? So how do we kind of, transition from getting the picture and then adding speed and restrictions to maybe, keep those things in place. And then we kind of take the gloves off and, what can they apply from what they started with and towards the end. And, generally it's a good way to do it. And then you just have to continue to do it again and again and again. So it's a great day before the game activity, because you're not putting too much demand on them, but you're also rehearsing the movements, especially if you're going to change tactical pictures. It's a really good way to do it in the proper spacing, because when you go laterally across the field, it should be the same rectangle shape that a full field is in. So the angles are all right, and the spacing is generally the same, or smaller spacing, but the angles are the same even within the field, because you're going 11v11.
That's fascinating, because I've never seen that play out. I think where I've generally seen a lot of coaches try to break these things down is where they'll break it into like groups, or they'll work on a different line of the team, and they'll work on the midfield together, they'll work on the front line, they'll work on the back line, as opposed to working as a complete unit, but slowing everything down so they can picture it better. That really makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, well, I mean, it's worked for us, and especially when you're trying to get everybody on the same page really quickly. College soccer is so challenged with time. It's a really efficient way to do it. And then, peeling back a layer, if there's something that we want to specifically highlight, hey, our 3 midfielders are going against a diamond midfield. What we would do is we would put restraining lines or cone off certain areas where the defenders and the opposing strikers are working against each other. The midfield picture that we're trying to paint would be against each other, and then that way we can highlight those areas for them to see even more. Kind of to your point that you brought up.
Really interesting. Is this something that you found, like young players as they come in, they join the program for the first time, that maybe they're a little thrown off by?
Yeah, some of them laugh at it. You're like, oh, we're walking soccer, and then it's the really funny thing is when they can't do it right.
Right.
That's the funny thing, because and the same thing goes with patterns. Going back to the psychological piece is we'll go completely unopposed, 11 against 0, and we'll ask them to do the same movements. So I kind of even go back one further layer of 11 against 0, asking them to do the same movements that they were against 11v11, and it totally throws them off psychologically, because it's unopposed, it's you and the ball, and everybody's watching you, and people, and it really comes down to lack of concentration. It's not like they can't do any of those things, but when all eyes are watching, when it's just you and the ball, and the other 10 players are counting on you to do it, can you perform that task? So it's funny how they kind of laugh at it as really simple, but the real jokes when they can't concentrate or do it, and then they realize how important the activity is to those building blocks of us getting it right when there are 11 players. And that's the same thing. You can play 10 against 5, and I always use the adage that, guys, this is like playing 20 against 11 or 22 against 11 and not getting it right if you can't do it right 10 against 5 or 10 against 0. So, sometimes it takes them a few years to really understand what I'm trying to get across, but it usually works.
That psychological component gets left out of this balance a lot. There's always, maybe in the day, it's felt more like physical has trumped the psychological, but you're dead on in that you can do these different things, whether it's against, full competition, but at a slower speed, or it's against, smaller numbers, so you have the numerical advantage, or it's against nobody. And the psychological component changes with all of that.
Yeah. It's I kind of say, like, and I do less and less as I've gotten older and older, but, I would, tell the players, listen, none of you guys, you can all hit a 60-yard ball, or, arguably, or a 50-yard ball. It's the same thing that, an Atlanta United player would do, and same thing that you would do as a high school player. The difference is, as you go up to the professional ranks, is, as a high school player, you could hit a 50-yard ball exactly where you needed to, 3 out of 10 times. As a college player, you could do it 5 out of 5 times. As an A-League player, for me, I could do it 7 out of 8 times. A Premier League player or a top MLS player now is doing it 8 out of 10 times. And then, you got your Messis and Ronaldos doing it 9 or 10 times out of 10. And that's really the difference. The tasks are the same for youth player, I'd say you're, 16 and up, because you're coming in the same leg strength and you're doing those things. But the reason why they're pros is the consistent performance in those scenarios.
One more thing from me. So as you get into, game 1, match week 1, do the tactics in your mind, is it something that you're almost putting in? I think we hear this a lot with American football, where you're putting in the base offense or the base defense, and then you add layers to it as the year goes on. Is that kind of the way you look at it, or is it just getting players, embedded into the philosophy and the way you want them to play, and then the tactics change week to week depending on opponent, depending on form of the players, et cetera, et cetera?
That's a little bit of both. I think we try to apply our base concepts and then try to get them to understand, nuances from that. But that is assuming that that's working. Right. There might be partnerships, or there might not, people sometimes just don't grasp it, and you've got to kind of move on. And then maybe you tweak things that maybe are a better fit for them, because remember, this is, a week and a half, 2 weeks by the time we start. That's the only preparation we've had. So, we'll try something and we'll try to continue to build on that. But at the same time, sometimes you have to say it's just not working, and then you move on, and we'll cross that bridge, when we get there. But hopefully they, grasp the concepts and we kind of march on, if you will, and just try to get better and better and better at it, leading into conference play / hopefully, NCAA tournament play.
Yeah, it's been interesting to see how you've solved that problem over the last few years since I've been calling games, whether it's, personnel changes. I think obviously is an easy way to try to change it, but also, formation changes. I think I always think of you and your teams as 4-3-3 from the base, but some of the best soccer that I've seen your teams play in the last couple of years, I think was out of a 3-5-2, if I'm not mistaken, and it just suited that group.
Yeah, we've made some tweaks along the way that, and I don't know if it's instinct or just doing it for a while, and then the characteristics of the players. I mean, some of these guys, we've seen in 3 or 4 club games, and we see enough to go, oh man, that kid can help our program. Mm-hmm. But a lot of the training habits and things like that, we don't, not even training habits, but maybe we catch them on their 3 best games, and then we realize there's some deeper layers for us to kind of, build on and help them grow. That only comes with really working with players day in and day out.
It's going to be interesting to see this weekend. The first 2 games, short ramp up. Excited to see against good competition as well. These are teams that you know well, teams that you've seen over the years, kind of regular opponents, and a tough way to start the season. Do you like to start with, difficult opponents straight out of the gate to kind of challenge your group?
I do. I mean, I think it protects us against a false sense of security. I mean, there's a lot of teams that, start out their season 6-0, and they've just, and maybe they do those for different things. Maybe they've got a really young group and they want to build some confidence. But when push comes to shove, if you don't know really where you're at, you get found out pretty quickly. So I'd rather go 0-6 and play absolutely NCAA tournament caliber teams and go, all right, guys, we're maybe you lose some tight games along the way, but I'd rather know, where our weaknesses are and expose those prior to the conference, tournament, so we have time to fix it, as opposed to, especially young players going, oh yeah, we're great, we're 6-0. I mean, that doesn't mean anything when it comes down to it if you're not getting results at the right time.
Yeah, it's about, I think, setting that tone, like you said. That's the important thing here. And this is going to be an interesting tone set this weekend. If you can come out and join us 7 o'clock on Saturday at Emory University for Oglethorpe versus Washington and Lee, and then Sunday at 7 o'clock over at Oglethorpe. First time in a while Emory's come to Oglethorpe, correct?
It has. It's 3 years in a row, and it's obviously that's a pretty heated rivalry.
Yeah.
The big Atlanta rivalry. 2 oldest programs in the state of Georgia, and we've been going at it for a while, and they've been pretty heated. So we've played some games over there for different reasons, and but now we're finally back at Oglethorpe's campus on the new surface, and hopefully we'll continue our winning ways. But it's going to be a heated contest, so it'll be fun to watch.
Yeah, that's definitely one of the games to mark on your calendar. It's a fun one every year. That's at 7 o'clock on Sunday. Check GoPetrels.com for other upcoming games. For the video links, we'll be up with the stream a little bit before kickoff for both of those. And next week we'll come back and talk about how those went a little bit and talk about kind of the next steps as you get into the season and start to prepare. Jon, thanks for the time as always.
Absolutely. My pleasure. All right. Look forward to seeing you this weekend.